For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Best-selling author Amanda Prowse joins me to talk about her writing and her latest book, Will You Remember Me? Your first book, Poppy Day, tells the story of hairdresser Poppy Day and her soldier husband Mart, who is taken hostage in Afghanistan. You too are a soldier's wife. Is the Poppy Day character in any way based on your experiences and life as an army wife?
That's a really good question. I think essentially you can't write about a subject that you live without including your own experiences. And whilst Poppy's experiences, her story of her husband getting taken hostage, are entirely fictitious, I think I certainly used what it's like to be part of an army community, and certainly the fear and the loneliness that Poppy feels when her husband goes away is definitely how I feel when my husband goes away on tour. So definitely it was like therapy for me, my experience of being on my own, being alone, and I suppose my worst fears put down on paper.
You quit your job as a management consultant 5 years ago to focus on writing full-time. Tell us about this time, which was fraught with health problems, as well as what inspires your writing now.
It was a very difficult time for me, and I was actually the main breadwinner. My husband, as you said, is a soldier, and the wages aren't great. So as a management consultant, I was the main breadwinner, and we have 2 boys to consider, and we had a mortgage to pay, and we had, a life to live. And so it was a huge decision financially, as well as all the other implications, for me to stop work. But I think the main catalyst for me was I got sick, I got cancer, and it certainly changed me. And people say, did it change you in that you now grab every day and run with it? Actually, I always did. I was always a very glass half full kind of girl. And so for me, it was just an extension of that. I really thought about my future life and thought, what do I want to do? How do I want to spend however long I've got left on this planet, whether it's 4 years or 40 years, and who knows? What do I want to do? Do I want to get up every day, put on a suit and go and play this part where actually, it doesn't feel like me? And what I've always wanted to do, I had a yearning to write stories. And I've always said, I think if you feel you can do something, it's sort of inside you, that desire to try, isn't it? I mean, I have no desire to go and learn how to fly a plane. I know I can't do it and I don't want to do it. But writing was certainly something I felt I had in me. Every time I read a book, I'd think, I could do better than that. Or I'd read a book and think, I wish I'd written that. And they sort of fell into 2 camps for me. So I thought, right, I'm going to try it. And I remember Simeon came home from tour. He was in Afghanistan. And I said, I don't want to go back to work. I want to give up my job and I want to write stories. Now, a lot of men at this point would have said, well, that's great, darling, but we have bills to pay. Can you get back to work now? But he was amazingly supportive. And he said, well, you know what? This is your one life. Let's try it. So I wrote Poppy Day, as you mentioned, my first novel. And it was really a sort of exposing experience. It was like showing someone your diary for the first time, because, I tip-tap away in my pajamas, in my bed, thinking, oh, I hope this is great. But it's not till you put it out into the public that you know whether it's any good or not. We thought we might sell maybe 5,000 copies, and all the money from that is to raise money for soldiers who are injured back in the UK, who come back injured from Afghanistan. And we sold like 250,000 copies. And it totally, it's like, what? Absolute pinch me stuff, totally blew my mind. And people loved it. And I realised that I could tell stories. And what people love most, and what still inspires me to come to the second part of your question, is that I can relate to ordinary people like me. Women who maybe worry about their weight, women who maybe have got, more years behind them than ahead of them, women who maybe have the stress of bringing up kids, of politics, of the life we live in, of health. It's ordinary people like us. That's what life is. So I can write our stories and the things that happen to my characters, these ordinary women who find extraordinary situations knocking on their door. That's all my books are, and people say I really related to her. Especially as some of my heroines are in their 60s, some are in their 80s, as well as their 20s and 30s. I'm trying to break the mold when it comes to how we see women in literature.
As an army wife, you must be accustomed to being uprooted and moving on at a moment's notice. You mentioned that this is a pattern that has shaped your life. Please elaborate.
It really has. I call myself a nomad. And really it hasn't been by choice, but it has become quite a habit for me. So when I was a child, my father worked for the Ministry of Defence and lots of other big companies all over the world. And I went to school, many different schools in different countries, in America, in Germany, in Holland, in France and the UK. So it was a very normal part of my childhood. And then, of course, I fell in love with a soldier. You know, how bad planning was that? Instead of getting my cottage with roses around the door and a garden, suddenly we are uprooted every 6 months to a year. In fact, in the last 8 years, we've had 6 different addresses, which is huge. I don't bother unpacking anymore, Shannon. I literally have boxes. I have no idea what's in them. In fact, it's a constant source of debate. My husband says, if you haven't unpacked them for the last 3 years, you don't need that stuff. And I'm like, no, I've had it so long. It's a pressure to me now. It's a treasure. I need to keep it. So, but we'll deal with that. And it's a weird one. I'm very good at fitting into a new community, walking in, making new friends, because you have to, otherwise you'll be extremely lonely. And I'm also quite good at, you know, plonking a vase of flowers on a table and plumping a few cushions, and actually it feels like home. And I've realised that it's not bricks and mortar that make a home, it's the people that you're with, it's the experiences you have, it's the laughter you put into those walls. I'm very good at that. But I have to confess that I'm nearing 50, and my dream is to have somewhere I live long enough to plant something and watch it grow. I want to put pictures up, I want to paint a wall. And the army give us paper lampshades. Ugh, and we're not allowed to change them. That would be the first thing I would throw out, and have decent lampshades in my house. So one day I look forward to it.
You originally self-published your first book before being signed by your current publisher, Head of Zeus. What advice would you give to aspiring novelists who dream of publishing their own books?
It's great. I mean, this is the best time to be trying to get your work out there. The difficulty writers have always had, particularly when you're starting out, is getting people to notice and read your work. And I was really, I think, helped and aided by the fact that I didn't understand the publishing industry. I was incredibly naive, but it really helped me, Shannon, because I didn't see many of the boulders that were in my way. So instead of thinking, gosh, I need to find an agent, get a publisher, get my book read, get something commissioned, I wrote a story and I put it out there. And the digital market, the e-market, oh my word, you know, I can reach thousands of people with a click of a button. And if your work's good enough, if it catches, if people like it, they will read it. And then, of course, you're almost reversing the process. It puts you in control, because publishers are then looking at the number of ebooks that are read and sold, the amount of hits you get, your social media following, all that kind of stuff. So really, the writer, through the digital age, is so much more empowered than they ever were, which is wonderful. It means all of us can be published authors. How amazing is that? And the thing about starting out is, it's very, very easy to think, gosh, this is tough. Don't give up. Don't ever, ever give up. Keep going, keep writing, keep putting it out there, and if it's meant to catch, it will.
You're currently launching your newest book, Will You Remember Me? Can you tell us more about this book and what we can expect from you in the future?
Will You Remember Me is a very special novel to me. It's a book that I think will have a large impact on those that read it. It's the story of Poppy, so we catch up with Poppy from my first book, which if you haven't read, it doesn't matter. All my books stand alone, even though they're all linked. Will You Remember Me is what happens when Poppy is 32. She's leading this incredible life, the life she's always dreamed of. She's living in the countryside with her devoted husband. They have 2 beautiful, hilarious children, Peg and Max. And life's looking really good. Martin and Poppy have both escaped the sort of fairly disadvantaged childhood which they grew up in. And Martin says to her on New Year's Eve, this is going to be the best year yet. And you get this impending feeling of hope and joy, and you can't wait to see what the year holds for them. And then very quickly on in the book, you discover that Poppy has a lump on her breast, which is diagnosed as cancer. And Will You Remember Me is the story of what happens when cancer comes to knock on the door of an ordinary family, which is exactly what it does to hundreds, thousands of families all over the world. And it's how they deal with it, and it's what happens to Poppy in her fight, her struggle against this disease. And yes, it can be quite dark at times. It's not gory, it's not medical, it's actually very, very uplifting. One critic said, this is a book that whilst made me cry at times, had me punching the air. And I thought, that's great, that's exactly what I wanted. The book is uplifting and it's positive, and it carries a very important message that life goes on. But also, those that love you and those that you love, they never leave you, which is a wonderful message. And it's based on my own experience with being diagnosed with cancer. Obviously, not too much of a stretch there. I was also 32, also a mum, 2 kids, so the parallels are there. And I guess it was my worst nightmare. What would happen if I wasn't able to beat this disease? What would it be like trying to say goodbye to your family for the last time?
How do you do that? Want them to remember you?
Absolutely, and they do, of course.
That was author Amanda Prowse discussing her latest book, Will You Remember Me?